So we all think we know the story of the American Revolution, right? The big battles, the Declaration of Independence, the triumphant victory. But here's the thing. What happened the day after? Because the fight for America's survival, it was far from over. In fact, the new nation was teetering on the absolute brink of collapse. And that's the big question, isn't it? They just won their freedom against the most powerful empire on Earth. So how on earth was the entire experiment about to fail? Well, it turns out that victory unleashed a whole series of crises that nobody was really prepared for, threatening to tear the brand new country apart before it even got started. All right, first up, we have to get our heads around this. For a huge chunk of the population, the end of the war wasn't a party. It was the start of an absolute nightmare. The United States? Yeah, they were anything but. It's so easy to picture everyone marching in lockstep, but historians figured that as many as 1 in 5 colonists actually remained loyal to Britain. Now, this wasn't some tiny little fringe group. We're talking about a massive internal division that sliced right through communities, towns, and even families. So when the British Army packed up and left, these loyalists were just left behind. And the results were brutal. So-called patriot gangs literally hunted them down. Their property was confiscated, their homes were seized, and lives that had been built over generations were just gone. The sheer scale of this is hard to fathom. About 100,000 people fled the country, becoming refugees. And a lot of these folks were skilled merchants, lawyers, and major landowners. Their sudden departure ripped a huge hole in the American economy, especially in cities like New York, a hole that would take years and years to fix. So on top of all that internal chaos, the old enemy hadn't even really left yet. I mean, sure, Britain surrendered at Yorktown in 1781, but getting them to actually pack up and go home? Well, that was a whole other story. It was a long, drawn-out process. Okay, check out this timeline. The surrender was in October of 81, but the last British soldiers didn't board ships and leave New York until more than 2 years later, in November of 83. The official treaty wasn't even finalized by Congress until January 1784. Peace was a slow, agonizing crawl. And of course, they couldn't just leave gracefully. As a final parting shot, some departing British soldiers nailed their flag, the Union Jack, to a flagpole in Manhattan, and then they greased the pole. But in this amazing moment, a young American soldier named John Van Arsdale managed to climb it anyway, tearing down their flag and raising the stars and stripes. Just a moment of pure, defiant celebration. The British were finally gone, but what they left behind was a country that was economically just wrecked. Winning the war had come at a catastrophic cost, and boy, was the bill coming due. The new nation was stuck with $77 million in debt. For the time, that is an absolutely astronomical figure. $12 million of that was owed to allies like France and the Netherlands, and the new government had, get this, absolutely no power to raise any money to pay any of it back. Now, to really put this into perspective, to get how bad this was, the economic crash America went through after the revolution was per person even steeper than what Americans faced in the first few years of the Great Depression. The country was in an absolute free fall. This collapse just devastated everyday people, especially the farmers. They were cut off from the British trade routes that their families had relied on for generations. When they couldn't pay their debts, they lost their farms and were thrown into debtors' prisons. And here's the most bitter irony of all. Many of these men were veterans who had just fought a war for the very country that was now jailing them. This level of desperation was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And that spark finally came in western Massachusetts, led by a former Continental Army captain named Daniel Shays. The story of Daniel Shays is pretty tragic when you look at it. On one side, he's a genuine war hero. He fought at Lexington, Bunker Hill, Saratoga. And on the other side, he's a rebel leading an army against his own government. What could possibly push a patriot to that point? Just sheer, utter desperation. So Shays and thousands of other farmers and veterans, they got organized. They marched on the courthouses and physically shut them down to stop the foreclosures. Now, the rebellion was eventually put down by a privately funded militia, but the damage was done. The message was loud and clear. If the country's own war heroes were taking up arms against it, the whole system was fundamentally broken. And this rebellion, it absolutely terrified the nation's leaders. It was the final screaming alarm bell. In fact,
This event so shook George Washington that it was the thing that convinced him to come out of retirement, and his decision to get involved again would literally change the course of American history. So you gotta ask, what was the root cause of all this chaos? The debt, the powerlessness, the rebellion? Well, it was the nation's first try at a constitution, the Articles of Confederation. And it was, frankly, a government that was deliberately designed to be weak.
I mean, just look at what the National Congress couldn't do under the Articles. It couldn't tax anyone, so it couldn't pay its debts. It couldn't regulate trade, so the economy was a mess. It couldn't raise an army, so it couldn't even stop a rebellion. And maybe worst of all, to change anything, you needed a unanimous vote from all 13 states, which was, you guessed it, basically impossible. And this wasn't just some theoretical weakness. It had real, humiliating consequences. When Congress desperately needed money to pay war debts, tiny little Rhode Island single-handedly vetoed the plan. When Spain closed the Mississippi River to American trade, Congress was helpless. When Britain refused to leave its forts out west like they promised, Congress could do nothing. The nation was totally powerless. You know, the diplomat John Jay just nailed it when he said America had become the sport of European politics, a weak, divided nation that nobody on the world stage took seriously. The great experiment in liberty was turning into an international joke. So it was pretty clear at this point that little tweaks and small repairs weren't going to cut it. The very foundation of the country was rotten. The entire structure had to be torn down and rebuilt from scratch. And the question facing everyone was, what kind of nation was going to rise from